You know, at this stage in Honkai Star Rail, I would 100% trust the word of a masked fool over the IPC any day of the week. They cannot be trusted, but why? What are their intentions in Planarcadia? To gain an audience with aha? What are they up to? This is going to be the full breakdown of the IPC, what we know about them, their agenda, and what we can expect. Including the newest Stoneheart introduced to us, Pearl, who at the end of the quest actually makes a deal with Silverwolf of all people, who is one of the most notorious IPC wanted criminals. That's actually kind of crazy when you think about it, and it seems pretty obvious at this point, Pearl is going to enter the games, since we saw this mask at the end of 4.0 and in the trailer it was shown her wearing that exact mask. Plus, I mean, the mask itself resembles Pearl. She has a very aquatic, mermaid-like aesthetic while still being an Intellitron. Now at face value, the IPC looks noble, like they're trying to do good. They're trying to help out in Planarcadia. They're trying to form this anti-destruction alliance for the greater good to protect everyone from the destruction, especially after the Iron Tomb incident. But they are very, very adamant to have all these factions join. Then you have Pearl. Who is in charge of overseeing Planarcadia. Pearl is an Intellitron from the planet Screwlum, ranked at P45. And like we learned in this quest, Pearl tried to accumulate all the masks leading up to the Phantom Moon games, because we know the IPC kind of wanted to control how the games proceeded, probably even control the outcome, but they were only able to gather 3 masks, which then at the end of the quest, Silverwolf is trying to bargain for one. I mean, Pearl even states outright that the IPC intends to regulate the games with our resources and influence. Just the sheer audacity to try to regulate the games that are associated with the Aeon Aha. That goes against the very principle of this Aeon annihilation. This Aeon is famed for its unpredictability, so you must proceed with caution. Pearl then meets with Yao Guan, who also suspects their true agenda. The IPC don't want to just form this alliance so they're all equals. They want to kind of control and monopolize all these factions. Then when Pearl is talking to Silverwolf, she mentions a famous hacker named Zero. If you recall in my Stellarons video, we talked about Zero, who is a famous hacker who rivals Silverwolf that's also from Punk Lord. Interestingly, Pearl comments that some think she's an emanator of elation, while others say that she can enter the dark zone created by Mythos like it was her own backyard. But now she's a prisoner of the IPC. So I wonder if the IPC is going to utilize Zero's abilities to manipulate these games. Silverwolf then joking around calling them a bunch of corporate moneybags, even admitting that they've used Zero's powers already. Since both Zero and Silverwolf have the ability to ether edit, they can tamper with reality, creating an independent realm. And as Silverwolf states, a realming belonging solely to her. Now I have no idea if this is true or not, but when she mentioned how you can ether edit your own realm, it made me think of Himeko and her father, that little realm and room you go to when Himeko has that flashback. We learn Himeko died. I wonder if this is the IPC's doing to try to manipulate Himeko and the Astral Express to joining their alliance. I wouldn't put it past them, but that's just a thought I had. It seems very likely that Pearl will enter the games, and if she's been able to somewhat harness Zero's ether editing abilities, she would have a good chance navigating this world, editing and messing with the fabric of the games itself, giving the IPC the best chance of winning. I've even seen some comments from some of you guys suggesting that the whole world of Planarcadia is a fabricated one made up by the IPC to try to manipulate the games, which is interesting in itself. And the fact that Pearl herself is an Intellitron from the planet Screwlum obviously makes her intelligent and cunning, but less susceptible to the games and manipulation of the elation. So I think it's easy to figure out what her plan is and how she will execute it, but what's the bigger picture here for the IPC? What do they gain by winning these games? What is their true endgame here? Well, isn't that obvious?
For the war among the eons, we shall give it our all.
It's the same as everyone else. This is an Aeon war. And in an Aeon war, the Eons must destroy each other. And by that definition, the paths themselves. What I find very interesting about Planarcadia is the concept and the themes around having two sides to the same coin. Many faces, perfectly depicted and introduced by Sparkle and Sparksy, one being the original, one being the imposter, but both of them not even knowing which is which. And I know I've made theories about this before, but I really think we're finally going to come to a head whether the IPC really belongs to the preservation like we all think, or it's actually been compromised and infiltrated by the Voracity, ouroboros. If we really are in an Aeon war, then how do you propose Ouroboros of Voracity wins that war? By consuming everything. Just like destruction will destroy everything. I notice a lot of people really misunderstand what the path of Voracity actually means. It is very similar to gluttony, but not exactly the same. We know it's associated with the Leviathans that consume everything, worlds, planets, people, things. In the earliest days of the Honkai Star Rail universe, the Leviathans ran amok, which led to the ascension of Claypotha Preservation, to directly counter that Aeon. Ouroboros and Claypotha are two sides to a coin. And during the Swarm disaster, Ouroboros and Tazeroth of Propagation were a match made in heaven, until Ouroboros went missing, and nobody's found this Aeon since or heard of where it is. In the trailer they teased Ouroboros subtly down below, and then they mentioned a missing Aeon later in the trailer.
Don't worry. I'll inform the Intelligentsia Guild about the Leviathan research.
You actually found me? Guess that makes you the real detectives, huh? To hunt down a banished demon. I'm afraid you can't afford my price.
When has Harmony's dance needed preservation's guidance?
Gluttony is one of the 7 deadly sins. It is the flaw of consuming too much, literally, like eating, which falls under the category of Voracity too if you're just hungry. But Voracity also means pursuing an ideal, a passion, something very aggressively, relentlessly, like you won't take no for an answer. That is the fundamental concept of this path. Yes, it's associated with consumption literally, but it also means just consuming everything that you want, desire. Now let's look at the IPC. Throughout history, yeah, they started out as shipping materials to their Aeon to build these walls and barriers for protection. But the true followers of the preservation are the architects, like we saw in Eurillo 6. The IPC behaves in a way that doesn't really make sense for this Aeon. The IPC is the Honkai Star Rail equivalent of a greedy corporation. When they do things that are good, it's usually for a secret agenda they have. This corporation, this faction, is obsessed with gaining more. They want to own everyone, everything in the cosmos, planets, resources, you name it. They've done terrible things to gain those, and they've also compromised through business deals, debts, a wide variety of different means to get what they want. This has been obvious to us since we started playing this game. Boodhill's homeworld was destroyed by the IPC because they wanted the resources of that planet. They massacred his family, and anyone that lived on that planet had basically no choice but to join the IPC and work for them. That is how they get most of their employees and how they're so big of an organization with so many employees and able bodies. Then there's a planet like Topaz's that suffered from pollution and toxic waste. The IPC had the resources to save her planet, and they did. So in this scenario, they look like the good guys, but it's not for free. The planet is now owned by them, and people still had to work for them. Topaz is an exception because she took a pretty grim situation and made the most of it. She realized her situation and rose the ranks to become a Stoneheart. But for the millions and millions of people and planets that get indoctrinated into the IPC, you don't have a choice. This is just how this organization functions. And just look what Ceridra, somebody from Amphorius, made basically in a computer by Iron Tomb. The minute they meet the IPC and see the outside world, this is what they have to say. That IPC would have never grown so big on trade alone. Trade being what the followers of preservation originally founded the IPC for. It may pretend to be a wealthy merchant with clean hands, but I'm willing to bet that they grew fat on gory oppression and bloodshed. What a weird choice of words. Grew fat on gory oppression and bloodshed. If that really isn't on the nose, referring to an Aeon that consumes all and everything, then I don't know what is. This has to be one of the most obvious, blatant Easter eggs hinting at the IPC following Ouroboros. And there's 2 known emanators of the preservation, Diamond and Teravan Kane. Teravan Kane's known to be an overweight, very greedy man that eats a lot. Kind of on the nose if you ask me. I don't think he's a emanator of preservation at all. But he is a confirmed emanator, so maybe he's an emanator but just of Ouroboros, and that would actually be the first emanator of Ouroboros that we know of. Now you tell me, this type of behavior from a faction, what path does it sound like to you? I think the IPC truly does have a Trojan Horse Voracity problem. It always has. If these two eons counter each other, then maybe Ouroboros infiltrated the IPC long ago, and it's consuming from within. All of the core principles of Voracity line up with greed, and that is what the IPC is, greedy. Even down to the Phantom Moon games and Planarcadia now. This whole entire quest starts out with Jade trying to get us to go to this banquet, but secretly manipulating us to go to Planarcadia. And a banquet is often a huge gathering where people feast. Interesting, that might be another Easter egg. And you know, they're trying to gather everyone in one place to devour them, consume them. Even the harmony in the trailer states, when have we ever needed the preservation? So it's not just these three factions that they're going after, there's more that we're not seeing. Do you think they didn't know this was Himeko's homeworld? Even Himeko and Welt acknowledged the fact that the IPC deliberately tried to get them to come here instead. Which even further makes me believe that Himeko with her whole death is the IPC possibly manipulating her. The IPC clearly wants all these factions to join them in their anti-destruction alliance. It sounds good on paper, what they want is control. When the Astral Express says that they won't join, but will act as your sail, will still be your ally, you just won't have control over us. They can't accept this. Same with the Alliance, they want the Shanzhou Alliance under their heel too. And I mean, we all know what happens when you say no to the IPC. Struggling planets that already needed their help, well, they'd have no choice. And I mean, we know all too well what happens to people that refuse the IPC. It doesn't end well. Their last resort of not getting what they want is to use force. It always has been. Would they use force indirectly to get what they want? I wouldn't put it past them for a second. Basically what I'm saying is, the IPC does everything and anything possible to act in such a Voracity type of way, whenever they want something. That is how they're going to win the Aeon War. That is how Ouroboros would win this war. Consume all the other paths into its own main faction. If the Eons are just paths themselves, then the factions that follow these Eons are like the pieces on the chessboard actually moving around. It is very difficult for me to sit here and not think that the IPC wholeheartedly is acting on Ouroboros' best interest. The symbolism here is just too perfect. Most of you are probably familiar with what a Trojan Horse is. It's said that to penetrate the city of Troy, some Greek soldiers hid inside this wooden horse. The people of Troy, thinking it's a gift, brought it into the city, where then they exited the horse at night and sacked the city. Claypoth is the Aeon of building walls and barriers that directly counters Ouroboros. That's why it rose to Aeonhood. What a perfect way to try to win the Aeon War and try to defeat Claypoth once and for all, not by bashing the outside of the walls, but to Trojan Horse your way in to their biggest organization and eat them alive from within. It just makes so much sense. And I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but Pearl's whole aesthetic is like a mermaid aquatic-like. And Ouroboros' most notorious followers were the Leviathans. And Leviathans are primordial sea serpents or dragons, always associated with the sea and water. I don't know, maybe that one's a stretch, but it's still a connection. But does that mean they don't follow the preservation at all? No, actually, on the contrary, I think it's kind of like the themes of Sparkle and Sparksy. I think the IPC has its own identity problem, because it does follow the preservation but also follows the Voracity. And I honestly think that's why Ouroboros was teased in the Planarcadia trailer. They also have Stephen Lloyd, who is the youngest member of the Genius Society, in this trailer as well, mentioning how they're going to research into the Leviathans. Why would they even mention the Leviathans in Planarcadia and have Ouroboros teased if there wasn't a faction involved in this chapter that was linked to the Voracity? And what other faction can it be? Now obviously I have my own doubts whether the Stonehearts are a unified group. At first I thought maybe Diamond and the Stonehearts are kind of like the Preservation's rebellion against its inner own workings of the Voracity. But even during Aventurine's trial, they were all split down the middle of whether he should pretty much die or be able to live and get his cornerstone revived. Which means I think within the Stonehearts themselves, they might also be divided. But that's kind of hard to say. What this whole Planarcadia chapter could mean for the IPC is obviously uncovering the truth of their own organization, which would pretty much stifle half of the organization within that doesn't even know they follow the Voracity. But Pearl winning the Phantom Moon Games could be her way of exposing the Voracity. Maybe that's what the Stonehearts mean to do. Or they mean to win the Phantom Moon Games to get what they want. Consume all these other factions, these paths, into their own, amalgamate them into the IPC, furthering Ouroboros' agenda in this Aeon War. The fact that Pearl is working with Silverwolf and acting on her own accord, she even states, don't view this as a transaction between a Stoneheart and a Stellaron Hunter, but two individuals. She could be acting on her own here. But what I can say comfortably is we cannot trust the IPC and we certainly can't trust Pearl. They clearly have their own agenda here in Planarcadia. And now having somebody like Zero in prison and able to use their abilities in ether editing, potentially making new realities and realms, this should be very alarming to all the other factions. And you can be rest assured that the Astral Express might have declined their invitation multiple times already. They're not going to take no for an answer. And I'll even go on the limb here and state that I think it's a very good possibility that the real villains of Planarcadia are the IPC, and by extension possibly Ouroboros. Would kind of make for a nice interesting twist in the Land of Elation, since the destruction is always front and center as the main villain and main antagonistic Aeon. But Ouroboros has been causing the cosmos much more strife for a much longer time, even before destruction even existed. Wouldn't it be cool to see the Preservation and the Voracity go head to head? Two Aeons that counter each other within the same faction? At this current stage in the timeline, I think the Voracity does have a bigger leg hold on the IPC than the Preservation does now. And I'm incredibly intrigued to see how this all plays out. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the IPC secretly follows Ouroboros of Voracity? Do you think Pearl and the IPC are going to use Zero's reality editing abilities to manipulate Planarcadia, everyone's reality? Or maybe they already have? And what we see now as a result of that, since, well, that would also explain why Planarcadia is now monopolized by the IPC, and why they were so interested in this place. To have one Stoneheart basically stationed here is kind of a big deal. I would also like to state that Silverwolf must know the truth of the IPC, since they do have LEO scripts. Silverwolf's involvement here might be to win the games, but I also think she means to save Zero and release her from prison. I can't really see somebody like Silverwolf being okay with the fact that the IPC have basically her best rival from the same homeworld in prison. And lastly, what do you think of the two geniuses that were teased in the trailer, mentioning the Leviathans? Are they going to have a major role to play in uncovering the truth of the IPC? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. Will the IPC consume all the other factions like they're clearly trying to do, or will we rip off the mask of the IPC finally after years of playing this game and speculating? And like Sparkle and Sparksy, the IPC will have their own internal identity crisis. Cannot wait. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.